Hello everyone, I have another 3-card blind puzzle to share with you today. This puzzle very much revolves around the card Death's Shadow. Something that's very interesting about this quiz, I think, is that Death's Shadow reads as a relatively simple card, but doing the math can be extremely challenging. It is also worth noting here that Death's Shadow has seen competitive play in the modern format, which means that the math that you do in this sort of puzzle may actually be applicable to games outside of 3-card blind. If you haven't done a 3-card blind puzzle before, I do recommend that you refresh yourself on the rules of 3-card blind as a format. But to give you a quick summary, there are 2 players at the table, and each has a deck of 3 cards that starts in their opening hand. You are tasked to determine the outcome of the game, provided that there are no other variables other than those cards that those players have. This puzzle has been pulled straight from the tournament for August, so I will reference the players who submitted these decks. The first deck is City of Traitors, Black Lotus, and Stormbreath Dragon, submitted by user King Kai. The second deck is Tarnished Citadel, Blackmail, and Death's Shadow, which was submitted by 2 players, CK and Gavelna. But I will add here that there are different pods that players are matched in, and CK was not in the same pod as King Kai, so this puzzle is mostly relevant for Gavelna and King Kai. For this puzzle, King Kai will be going first. Right now, I would encourage you to pause the video and consider the possible outcomes of the game. Once you think you've come up with a solution, continue the video and we'll see if you were correct or not. Okay, at this point, hopefully you've taken a bit of time to consider how the game may play out. There are numerous ways to solve this puzzle, so I am going to focus on the one that I think is the most simple and easiest to explain within the context of this video. As strange as it is, we are going to approach this puzzle the same way that you would approach a mathematical proof. So to begin that proof, let me first pose a true statement. If both players at the table are able to force a stalemate, it is in the best interest of at least one of those players to force that stalemate. The easiest way to force a stalemate in this match is going to be to manipulate the Death's Shadow player's life total such that the other player cannot win by continuing to take actions. So let's start by proving that the Stormbreath Dragon deck cannot win this match. The Stormbreath Dragon does damage in increments of 4 to the Death's Shadow player, and the Death's Shadow player, in between those increments of 4 damage, can use Tarnished Citadel to do 3 damage to themselves, allowing them to somewhat control their own life total. So by that logic, the Stormbreath Dragon, after attacking twice, will have put the Death's Shadow player to 12 life. The Death's Shadow player can then use Tarnished Citadel to deal 3 damage to themselves and play Death's Shadow, which will mean that Death's Shadow comes down on the same turn that the Death's Shadow player has 9 life. This 9 life number is very significant because at 9 life, the Stormbreath Dragon cannot outrace the Death's Shadow. If the Stormbreath Dragon attacks again and sets the Death's Shadow player to 5 life, the Death's Shadow is going to be able to crack back for 8 damage. Now the Stormbreath Dragon deck would be at 12 life, and the Death's Shadow is so much bigger than the Stormbreath Dragon that the Stormbreath Dragon has no choice but to continue to try to outrace the Death's Shadow deck. If they attack again, the Death's Shadow player goes to 1 life, leaving Death's Shadow as a 12/12, which can kill the Stormbreath Dragon player on the crackback in 1 hit. If the Stormbreath Dragon deck were to try to stop attacking once the Death's Shadow player hits 5 life, they will still lose the game because multiple attacks from Death's Shadow will force them to block and ultimately cost them their life. Let's rewind for just a moment and make the assumption that the Stormbreath Dragon deck chooses not to attack once the Death's Shadow player hits 9 life. This would leave the Death's Shadow player in the situation where they have a 4/4 Death's Shadow and they're staring down an untapped Stormbreath Dragon. However, what the Death's Shadow player can do is attack with their 4/4 Death's Shadow with the threat of the untapped Tarnished Citadel. If the Stormbreath Dragon player declares a block, the Tarnished Citadel can be activated to boost the power of Death's Shadow, giving it a favorable combat outcome. And if the Stormbreath Dragon deck chooses not to block, then the Death Shadow deck is going to eventually just kill the Stormbreath Dragon player by attacking every turn. What is significant here is that it shows that the Stormbreath Dragon deck cannot win the game because the Death Shadow deck can interfere using Tarnished Citadel to set up a scenario that the Stormbreath Dragon deck can't dig their way out of. If the Stormbreath Dragon deck can't win, that means their best possible outcome is to try to force a stalemate. Step 1 for the Stormbreath Dragon deck to try to force a stalemate is to just not attack at all. This puts the Death Shadow deck in a position where they have to use Tarnished Citadel to begin to lower their own life to the point where they can play the Death Shadow. If the Death Shadow player uses Tarnished Citadel first and puts themselves at 17 life, this offers the Stormbreath Dragon deck the opportunity to do 4 damage and put the Death Shadow at 13 life. 13 life is a really uncomfortable number for the Death Shadow deck, and I will demonstrate to you why that is. Once the Death Shadow player is at 13 life, the Stormbreath Dragon deck doesn't need to continue to attack. This puts the Death Shadow player in a situation where they can pick one of 2 options. They can stay at 13 life and accept the stalemate, or they can use Tarnished Citadel to play Death Shadow, putting themselves at 10 life. If the Death Shadow player does choose to go to 10 life, the Stormbreath Dragon deck can retaliate and bring them down to 6 life. 6 life is a position where the Death Shadow deck doesn't have many options available to them. The Death Shadow player can no longer afford to activate their Tarnished Citadel. If they do so, they will go to 3 life, which leaves them in a position where they will die on the crackback from the Stormbreath Dragon. So their best option is simply to attack for 7 damage. Now at 13 life, the Stormbreath Dragon deck can hit on the crackback for another 4 damage, setting the Death Shadow player to the awkward life of 2. At 2 life, Death Shadow is an 11/11, which isn't quite enough to kill the Stormbreath Dragon player on the crackback, which means the Death Shadow player will lose here. This is where we begin to sum things up. Regardless of which player tries to go for a win, the other player is going to be able to interfere and steal the win from underneath them. This means that it's in the best interest of both players at the table to do nothing and hope that the opponent messes up. However, in 3-card blind, players play optimally, and optimally in this scenario is to continue to do nothing indefinitely, which is defined as a stalemate. If you found this puzzle interesting and want to try more puzzles, I recommend that you check out the rest of my videos on the channel and also join the 3-card blind Discord. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you soon.